You might want to remember this sound, I told her, because the next one you hear could be a judge's gavel. The last sheet of corrugated steel hit the ground behind me with a crash that sent 3 crows exploding out of the oak trees. Dust rolled across the pasture. Diesel fumes burned my throat. And where my grandfather's red timber barn had stood since 1948, there was nothing left but splintered beams, twisted roofing, and the pale rectangle of its concrete foundation baking beneath the Tennessee sun. A yellow excavator idled beside the wreckage. Its hydraulic pump hissed. Standing 10 feet away in spotless white sneakers was Cynthia Harrow, president of the Briarwood Hills HOA. She wasn't horrified. She was smiling. "Your barn is gone forever," she said. Then she folded her arms. Actually smirked. For a few seconds, I couldn't answer. I could smell fresh-cut pine from beams that had survived 76 winters. I could taste dust between my teeth. Somewhere beneath that pile was the workbench where my father taught me to sharpen a chisel. The north wall still carried pencil marks showing my height from age 6 to 16. 6 generations of fingerprints had been on that wood. Now it looked like landfill. Cynthia glanced toward the demolition crew as if she'd just supervised the removal of an ugly mailbox. "We gave you sufficient notice, Daniel." I looked at her. "No, you gave me HOA violation letters, which you ignored, because I'm not in your HOA." That smile tightened. There it was. The sentence she hated most. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 47 years old, and I restore historic timber structures for a living. Churches, mills, farmhouses, barns that most developers would bulldoze because restoring something properly takes patience. That barn. I knew every beam, every peg, every scar. More importantly, I knew exactly what it was worth. Cynthia didn't. Briarwood Hills had been built 15 years earlier along the eastern edge of my family's farm. 212 polished homes, identical stone mailboxes, chemically green lawns, and enough decorative fountains to make you forget the entire subdivision used to be soybean fields. Our farm was never part of it. The deed said so. The county plat said so. Their own incorporation documents said so. But Cynthia had spent 8 months insisting my barn violated Briarwood's architectural harmony. First came letters, then fines, then photographs taken from my fence line, then a certified notice demanding that I repaint the barn in one of 4 HOA-approved colors. I mailed everything back with copies of my deed. She mailed me another fine. I should have realized then that this wasn't confusion. It was preparation. Now I stood in front of 76 years of family history reduced to broken lumber while Cynthia brushed imaginary dust from her sleeve. "You'll thank us eventually," she said. "Property values matter." I stared past her at the excavator. Its bucket had punched straight through the west wall. That detail mattered. So did the Orange County inspection tag still nailed to one surviving post. And the small brass plaque Cynthia's crew had apparently failed to notice beneath the collapsed entrance beam. I walked toward it. Cynthia followed. "What are you doing?" I crouched, pulled away a piece of shattered siding, and wiped the dust with my thumb. The brass appeared underneath. She read the first line. Her expression changed. Only slightly. But I saw it. Mercer Heritage Barn, 1948. Below that were 3 words that would eventually cost her HOA millions. County protected structure. I stood. Cynthia recovered quickly. "That doesn't change anything." I almost smiled. Because she was right about one thing. The barn was gone. What she didn't know was that 6 months earlier, during a restoration assessment, I had documented every hand-hewn beam, every stone footing, every iron hinge, and every square inch of original material. And protected structures aren't replaced with whatever happens to be cheapest at Home Depot. They're reconstructed, piece by piece, by specialists, at the responsible party's expense. Behind us, the excavator shut down. The sudden silence felt enormous. I pulled out my phone and photographed Cynthia standing beside the wreckage. She frowned. "Why are you taking pictures?" "For the rebuild." She laughed. I didn't. Because 18 months later, in a packed county courtroom, that same photograph would be displayed on a 12-foot screen. Cynthia would be sitting 3 tables away. She wouldn't be smiling anymore. And a judge would slide a judgment across the bench carrying a number nobody in Briarwood Hills was prepared to see. $6 million. But that morning, Cynthia still thought she had demolished an old barn. She had no idea she'd just demolished the one structure the law could force her to put back exactly the way she found it. The first thing my grandfather ever taught me about that barn had nothing to do with farming. Wood remembers, he told me. I was 8 years old, standing beside him with both hands wrapped around a hammer too heavy for my wrists. The barn smelled like hay, machine oil, and sun-warmed oak. Grandpa Samuel tapped one of the massive support posts with his knuckles. Every mark means somebody was here before you. 39 years later, I stood on the same foundation staring at marks made by an excavator bucket. Some memories don't fade. They get louder. The Mercer farm covered 63 acres outside Franklin, Tennessee. My great-grandfather bought the first 22 in 1936, then added neighboring parcels whenever money allowed. By the time Grandpa Samuel inherited it, the property stretched from Miller Creek on the south side to an old limestone ridge overlooking what eventually became Briarwood Hills. The barn went up in 1948. Grandpa always said it took 14 men, 3 mules, and enough black coffee to float a battleship. No construction company, no prefabricated trusses. Local men cut white oak from the ridge, shaped the beams by hand, and joined them with wooden pegs. Even the foundation stones came from the creek. You could still see axe marks in the rafters. As a kid, I spent entire summers inside that building. The eastern stall held Grandpa's old Ford tractor. The western wall was lined with hand tools arranged with military precision. During thunderstorms, rain hammered the metal roof so hard we had to shout at each other. I loved that sound. My father, Thomas, loved the barn even more. He wasn't sentimental about much. He worked construction for 34 years and believed anything worth owning should either earn its keep or protect something that did. That barn did both. Cattle in winter, equipment in summer, family gatherings every October. When Dad developed pancreatic cancer, he stopped working almost overnight. But he kept going to the barn. Sometimes I'd find him sitting on an overturned bucket, drinking coffee beneath those old beams. One afternoon, about 6 months before he died, he handed me a folder. Heavy brown paper, county seal, survey maps, deeds, historic preservation documents. Keep these dry, he said. I laughed. Dad, the barn survived hurricanes. He didn't. Daniel. Something in his voice made me stop. He tapped the folder. Land attracts people who think memory is weaker than money. I remembered that sentence the morning Cynthia destroyed the barn. After Dad died, the farm passed entirely to me. I could have sold it. Developers certainly tried. The first offer was $2. $1 million. Then $2. $8 million. Then a company connected to Briarwood's original developer offered $3. $4 million for 40 acres. I refused every one. I wasn't wealthy. My pickup had 186,000 miles on it. My work boots were held together with more leather conditioner than leather. Most months, my restoration company operated on margins thin enough to make my accountant swear. But some things aren't inventory. Briarwood residents mostly understood that. At first, kids waved when I drove the tractor. Neighbors bought eggs from me. One retired couple even asked permission to photograph the barn for their Christmas cards. Then Cynthia Harrow became HOA president. The first time I met her, she was standing 6 feet inside my property line. She wore cream-colored slacks, oversized sunglasses, and perfume strong enough to compete with fresh manure. She was photographing my equipment shed. Can I help you? She lowered her phone. You're Daniel? That depends who's asking. Cynthia Harrow, Briarwood Hills, HOA president. She said it like she'd just introduced herself as governor. Then she pointed toward my barn. We've received complaints. About what? The structure. I looked behind me. My barn. It's visually inconsistent with the community. I actually waited for the punchline. None came. Your community ends at that fence. Her lips tightened. We all affect each other's property values. I stepped toward the survey marker between us. A steel pin with an orange cap. See that? She looked down. That's where your authority stops. For 1 second, neither of us spoke. Wind moved through the pasture. A loose piece of tin clicked softly on the barn roof. Cynthia slipped her phone into her purse. You might want to reconsider your attitude. Then she walked back toward her white Mercedes. I watched the tires disappear beyond the fence and remembered my father's folder sitting inside my office safe. Land attracts people who think memory is weaker than money. At the time, I thought Cynthia wanted the barn painted. I didn't understand yet. She didn't want to change it. She wanted it gone. The first violation notice arrived 11 days after Cynthia stepped across my survey line. It was taped directly to the barn door. Bright yellow paper, black letters, a red stamp across the top that read Final Compliance Warning. I stood there with my coffee in one hand and the notice in the other, listening to cattle shift behind the fence. Then I read it again. Unapproved exterior structure. Fine, $250. Required correction, repainting, architectural screening, or removal. I laughed, not because it was funny, because sometimes absurdity is so complete your body doesn't know what else to do. I called the number at the bottom. Cynthia answered on the second ring. Briarwood Hills Homeowners Association. This is Daniel Mercer. A pause. Then her voice changed. Oh, Daniel, I found your notice. Good. You attached it to private property. We're trying to resolve this cooperatively. By finding somebody who isn't a member? She sighed like I was a difficult child. Your barn is visible from 17 Briarwood homes. Our architectural committee determined that its deteriorated appearance negatively affects neighborhood standards. I looked up. The barn had been re-roofed 4 years earlier. The siding was weathered because it was 76-year-old oak, not because it was neglected. Cynthia, listen carefully. My property predates Briarwood. It isn't governed by your covenants. We disagree. That sentence told me everything. Facts weren't facts to Cynthia. They were obstacles. I photographed the notice, removed it carefully, and added it to a folder. That became a routine. Every document, every envelope, every email, every photograph. I kept everything. 2 weeks later, another notice arrived. $500. Then $750. Then a demand for a visual mitigation plan. I responded each time with the same 3 documents. My deed, the subdivision plat, and the county map showing the Mercer farm sitting completely outside Briarwood's legal boundary. Cynthia never addressed them. Instead, she escalated. One Saturday morning, I heard tires crunching on gravel. A white Mercedes rolled through my open farm gate. Cynthia stepped out with 2 HOA board members and a man carrying a clipboard. I shut off my table saw. The sudden silence inside the workshop made their footsteps sound unusually loud. What are you doing? Cynthia smiled. Inspection. No, we have a right to document nuisance conditions affecting neighboring properties. You have a right to document them from your property. The clipboard man raised a camera. I stepped between him and the barn. Put it down. He did. Cynthia didn't like that. Her cheeks tightened beneath a layer of makeup. You're making this unnecessarily hostile. You drove onto my land without permission. We're neighbors. No. Neighbors knock. One board member stared at his shoes. The other suddenly became fascinated with my tractor. Cynthia walked closer. Her perfume reached me before she did. Something floral and expensive. You know, Daniel, this could be very simple. How? Remove the barn. The words landed differently that time. No architectural screening. No paint. No compromise. Remove it. I looked at her. You've wanted that from the beginning. She smiled. Progress requires difficult decisions. Whose progress? For the first time, she hesitated. Barely half a second. But I caught it. Then she turned toward the ridge behind my barn. From there, you could see the newest section of Briarwood. 32 luxury homes. And between those homes and the county road sat my pasture. My barn. My land. That night, I pulled the county planning portal onto my computer. The monitor cast blue light across my office while rain tapped against the window. I searched Briarwood. Nothing unusual. Then I searched Cynthia Harrow. There it was. A planning application submitted 3 months earlier. Proposed Briarwood Hills Phase 4 access corridor. I opened the map. My stomach went cold. A dotted red line ran from Briarwood's newest development straight toward the county road. Straight across my farm. And directly through the footprint of my barn. I zoomed in. There was Cynthia's electronic signature beneath the application. Applicant representative. I leaned back and listened to the rain. Now the fines made sense. The photographs made sense. The inspections made sense. Even her obsession with an old barn suddenly made perfect sense. This had never been about property values. She needed an access road. My barn was standing in the middle of it. The next morning, another certified envelope arrived. This one didn't ask me to repaint anything. It gave me 30 days to demolish the barn voluntarily. Otherwise, the HOA would pursue all available remedies. I ran my thumb across the paper. Then I placed it beside my father's old brown folder. Cynthia thought she was building a paper trail against me. So I let her. Because by then, I had started building one against her. 3 days after I found Cynthia's access road application, a black SUV stopped beside my south fence. The engine stayed running. A man in a blue dress shirt climbed out, photographed the barn, photographed the road, then drove away without saying a word. The next morning, I received a letter from the county. Public nuisance review. That was when Cynthia stopped pretending this was an HOA dispute. She was trying to make the government do her demolition for her. I called the county office. A tired-sounding woman named Rachel pulled up the complaint. Structural instability, rodent infestation, fire hazard, abandoned agricultural equipment. She paused. Mr. Mercer, there are 14 allegations here. Who filed them? I can't disclose that over the phone. You don't need to. I could almost hear her thinking. We'll send an inspector. Please do. The inspector arrived Thursday morning. His name was Frank Delaney. 60-something. Gray mustache. Steel-toed boots that had actually seen mud. The kind of man I trusted immediately because he looked at buildings before paperwork. He spent 45 minutes inside the barn. Tapped beams. Checked footings. Photographed electrical panels. Climbed into the hayloft. When he came down, Cynthia's Mercedes was waiting outside my gate. Of course it was. She stepped onto the gravel. Well, Frank looked at her. And you are? Cynthia Harrow, HOA president. His face remained blank. Okay. I almost laughed. She wasn't used to titles failing. This structure presents obvious safety concerns, she said. Frank looked back at the barn. Such as, the age alone, age isn't a code violation. The exterior deterioration, cosmetic. There are children nearby. There are children near my house too. Cynthia's smile disappeared. Frank closed his clipboard. I found no immediate structural hazard. The silence after that sentence was beautiful. Then Cynthia pointed toward the roof. What about fire compliance? Current. Electrical. Permitted. Foundation. Stable. Each answer hit harder. Current. Permitted. Stable. Cynthia folded her arms. I'll be contacting your supervisor. Frank shrugged. Have a nice day. She stared at him like he had personally insulted the Constitution. 2 days later, the county closed the nuisance complaint. I thought that would slow her down. Instead, it made her reckless. The fines doubled, then tripled. The HOA sent me an invoice for $18,750. Architectural violations, administrative penalties, legal review costs, inspection fees for inspections I had never authorized. At the bottom, one sentence was printed in bold. Failure to remit may result in lien proceedings. I drove straight to the HOA office. The place occupied a renovated clubhouse overlooking a swimming pool. Air conditioning blasted cold enough to preserve meat. Cynthia sat behind a polished walnut desk with 3 board members beside her. I placed the invoice down. You're threatening a lien on property you have no jurisdiction over. Cynthia didn't even look at it. Our council believes differently. Then your council should read a map. One board member shifted. Cynthia leaned back. You've had every opportunity to cooperate. With what? Giving you my land. Her eyes sharpened. Nobody had mentioned the access corridor yet. I pulled the planning application from my folder. Then I slid it across the desk. For the first time since I'd met her, Cynthia Harrow stopped moving. Phase 4. Access corridor. Applicant representative, Cynthia Harrow. Her fingers rested beside the signature. You went through planning records. They're public. That proposal is preliminary. It runs through my barn. It provides emergency access for hundreds of residents. Across property you don't own. Her voice hardened. Sometimes individual interests have to accommodate community needs. There it was. Not denial. Just entitlement. I leaned forward. You want the road? She said nothing. Make an offer. A tiny smile returned. We already did. No. Your developer did. I refused. $3.4 million was generous. My land isn't for sale. Everything is eventually. I stood. That was the moment I understood Cynthia wasn't bluffing. She genuinely believed resistance was temporary. A fine could become a lien. A complaint could become an order. Enough paperwork could turn theft into procedure. As I reached the door, she spoke behind me. You're going to lose that barn, Daniel. I turned. She was smiling again. You can make this easy, or you can make it expensive. I looked at the walnut desk, the spotless office, the Phase 4 map between us. Then I thought about my father's brown folder. Expensive works for me. Her smile faltered. Only for a second. That evening, I opened Dad's folder completely for the first time in years. Deeds, surveys, restoration reports. Then, near the bottom, I found an envelope stamped by the County Preservation Commission. Inside was a document I had forgotten existed. Historic Conservation Covenant. I read the first page, then the second. By the third, I stopped breathing for a moment. The barn wasn't merely protected from demolition. Any party responsible for unauthorized destruction could be required to reconstruct it using historically equivalent materials, traditional joinery, and preservation-certified labor. Not repair. Reconstruct. Exactly. I looked toward the dark silhouette of the barn outside my window. Then at Cynthia's $18,750 invoice. She thought she had found a way to make resistance expensive. What she didn't understand was that the most expensive object in this fight wasn't my land. It was the barn she was threatening to destroy. The demolition order arrived on a Friday at 4:53 p.m., 7 minutes before the county offices closed. That timing wasn't accidental. I was washing sawdust off my hands when the certified envelope landed on my workbench. The paper smelled like toner and bureaucracy. Emergency abatement authorization. I read it twice, then a third time. According to the document, my barn had been declared an immediate threat to public safety following a supplemental engineering assessment. There was just one problem. Nobody had performed one. I called Frank Delaney. He answered from his truck. "Frank, did you re-inspect my barn?" "No." "Did somebody from your department?" Silence. "What did you get?" I read him the authorization number. I heard keys tapping. Then nothing. "Daniel." His voice had changed. "That number belongs to a drainage enforcement case from 2021. The room suddenly felt cold. "So this order is fake?" "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." He lowered his voice. "Don't touch anything. Send me a copy." Monday morning, I hired an attorney. Her name was Rebecca Shaw, and unlike the first lawyer Cynthia had probably expected me to call, Rebecca specialized in land use litigation and historic preservation. Her office smelled like coffee and old paper. She read Cynthia's notices without speaking, then the Phase 4 application, then the conservation covenant. When she reached the demolition authorization, she took off her glasses. "Who gave you this?" "Certified mail." She held it toward the window. "This seal is scanned." That metallic taste hit my mouth again. What does that mean? It means somebody wanted this to look official. Rebecca spent the next week pulling records. What she found was worse. Briarwood's Phase 4 developer had promised buyers a second emergency exit before the newest homes could receive final occupancy approval. Without that road, 32 properties faced delayed closings. Millions of dollars were sitting behind my barn. And Cynthia? Her real estate company was listed as the exclusive sales broker. Every delayed closing cost her money. Now I understood the urgency. The fines weren't about architecture. The nuisance complaint wasn't about safety. The barn wasn't ugly. It was expensive. Rebecca filed an emergency notice with the county, challenging every HOA claim and warning against unauthorized entry. We mailed copies to Cynthia, the HOA board, the developer, the sheriff. I installed 2 additional cameras. Then I waited. For 9 days, nothing happened. No letters. No Mercedes. No inspectors. The pasture became quiet again. Too quiet. On the 10th morning, I left before sunrise for a restoration job 40 miles away. At 7:18 a.m., my phone vibrated. Motion detected. I glanced at the screen. A flatbed trailer. Then an excavator. Then Cynthia's white Mercedes. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I pulled onto the shoulder. The live camera feed shook slightly in the wind. 3 workers were standing beside my gate. One held bolt cutters. At 7:21, they cut my chain. I called the sheriff. Then Rebecca. Then I turned around. By the time I reached the farm, I could hear the excavator from half a mile away. That deep diesel growl rolled across the fields. Black exhaust hung above the ridge. I drove through the open gate and slammed my truck into park. Stop. The excavator bucket was already inside the west wall. Timber cracked. Not snapped. Cracked. A deep, ugly sound like a tree splitting in a storm. I ran toward the operator. He stopped. Cynthia stepped between us. "You're trespassing," I said. She held up a folder. "We have authorization." "No, you don't. The structure has been condemned. That document is under investigation." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the operator's face. He climbed down. "I was told this was cleared." "It wasn't." Cynthia spun toward him. Continue. He shook his head. Lady, I'm not touching anything until somebody verifies this. That should have ended it. It didn't. Cynthia pulled out her phone. Made 2 calls. 20 minutes later, another man arrived in a pickup bearing the developer's logo. They argued beside the equipment. I filmed everything. Every face. Every license plate. Every word. Then Cynthia looked directly at my camera. Finish it. The excavator started again. The bucket rose. And my barn came apart one beam at a time. I didn't physically stop them. Rebecca had given me one instruction that morning. Document everything. So I did. The west wall collapsed at 8:06. The roof followed at 8:19. At 8:47, the last major frame hit the ground. Cynthia walked toward me through the dust. Her white shoes were gray now. Behind her, 76 years of Mercer history lay broken beneath an excavator. She looked at the wreckage. Then at me. Your barn is gone forever. That smirk appeared. Exactly the one she'd worn in my nightmares afterward. I looked past her toward the surviving entrance post. The orange inspection tag was still there. So was the brass preservation plaque beneath the debris. And above us, both security cameras were still recording. I raised my phone. Click. One photograph. Cynthia beside the ruins. The excavator behind her. Timestamp embedded. GPS embedded. Her folder still in her hand. She frowned. Why are you taking pictures? I looked at the barn. Then back at her. For the rebuild. She laughed. But this time I knew something she didn't. Rebecca had already confirmed the covenant. The cameras had recorded the cut chain. The county had confirmed the demolition authorization number was invalid. And Cynthia had just ordered the destruction herself while standing directly beneath 2 cameras. She thought she had finally removed the obstacle blocking phase 4. What she had actually done was turn an HOA dispute into a preservation case, a trespass case, a fraud investigation, and one of the most expensive reconstruction claims our county had ever seen. Cynthia drove away believing she had won. I stayed behind in the dust and started counting beams. The first person I called after the dust settled wasn't the police. It was Rebecca. She arrived 43 minutes later in a dark blue sedan, stepped onto the gravel, and stopped cold. For once, my attorney had nothing to say. The smell of diesel still hung over the pasture. Broken oak beams lay across the foundation like bones. Hydraulic fluid glistened in one patch of dirt where the excavator had been parked. Rebecca slowly pulled out her phone. Tell me you recorded everything. 2 cameras. My phone. Audio too. Her eyes moved toward me. Everything. From the moment they cut the chain. That changed her expression. Not excitement. Something colder. Professional focus. Then nobody touches this site. By noon, yellow evidence tape stretched around the foundation. A sheriff's deputy photographed tire tracks. Frank Delaney arrived from the county and stood over the demolition order Cynthia had left behind. He stared at the document for maybe 20 seconds. Then he swore, quietly, that signature isn't mine. I looked at him. The bottom of the authorization carried his name. Franklin Delaney, Senior Code Inspector. Frank pointed at it. I never signed this. Rebecca stepped closer. Would you state that formally? I'll state it under oath. That was the first domino. The second fell that afternoon. Rebecca subpoenaed the HOA's communications with the developer. The third came 2 days later when the county preservation officer inspected the ruins. Her name was Dr. Elaine Porter. She wore hiking boots, carried a battered leather notebook, and treated every broken beam like evidence from a crime scene. She found the brass plaque beneath the entrance timber. Then she looked at me. This covenant is still active. I know. Do they? They do now. Elaine crouched beside one of the hand-hewn posts. This isn't ordinary replacement liability. Rebecca folded her arms. Explain. Elaine ran her fingers across the axe marks. Equivalent species. Equivalent dimensions. Traditional joinery. Salvage where possible. Custom milling where not. She looked toward the collapsed roof. And preservation certified labor. I already knew what that meant. Cynthia didn't. Not yet. Over the next 3 weeks, specialists came through my farm. Structural historians. Timber framers. Stone masons. Preservation engineers. Every visit added another page to the estimate. White oak beams that size couldn't be ordered from a lumberyard. They had to be sourced. Seasoned. Hand-shaped. The original limestone foundation had to be cataloged stone by stone. Even the iron hinges needed to be reproduced by a blacksmith. The first preliminary estimate came in at $2. 7 million. Rebecca stared at it. That's before damages. The second estimate included engineering, archaeological monitoring, code integration, business interruption, lost use, and restoration oversight. For $1 million. Then Elaine discovered something beneath the collapsed north wall. A carved beam. Beside the date were 14 sets of initials. The men who built the barn. My grandfather's initials were third from the left. SM. I brushed sawdust from the letters with my thumb. For the first time since the demolition, my hands started shaking. Elaine photographed the beam. This matters. To me, yes. To the case, too. That beam became proof of original fabric, craftsmanship, and documented historic significance. Plant. Payoff. The things Cynthia dismissed as old wood were becoming line items. Then Rebecca found the email. She called me at 9:12 one night. Daniel, sit down. I was already sitting. What happened? Discovery came back from the developer. I heard keyboard clicks. Then she read Cynthia's message. The email had been sent 4 days before the demolition. The developer's project manager had warned her in writing that no confirmed county authorization existed and that crews should not enter my property. Cynthia replied 12 minutes later. I understand the risk. Remove the structure before Mercer delays Phase 4 again. I'll handle the paperwork. I didn't speak. Rebecca didn't either. Rain tapped against my kitchen window. Finally, I asked if she knew. She knew. That email changed everything. This wasn't a mistaken boundary. It wasn't bureaucratic confusion. It wasn't an overzealous HOA enforcing rules in the wrong place. She had been warned. She ordered it anyway. Rebecca amended the lawsuit the next morning. Trespass. Destruction of protected property. Fraudulent documentation. Civil conspiracy. Interference with property rights. Punitive damages. The developer immediately started blaming Cynthia. Cynthia blamed the contractor. The contractor produced her written authorization. Everybody suddenly had documents. Unfortunately for Cynthia, so did I. 2 weeks later, Briarwood called an emergency HOA meeting. I attended. The clubhouse smelled like burnt coffee and panic. Homeowners packed every chair. Cynthia sat at the front table, pale but still defiant. She told them the lawsuit was an exaggerated financial attack. Then Rebecca placed the reconstruction estimate on the projector. $5,842,600. Nobody moved. Add legal costs, preservation supervision, lost income, and statutory damages, and the number crossed $6 million. Someone in the back whispered, Jesus. Cynthia stared at the screen. Her face emptied. For months, she had treated my barn like worthless lumber blocking her road. Now every hand-cut joint had a price. Every stone had a price. Every forged signature had a price. And the old beam carrying my grandfather's initials? That had become the heart of the case. I looked across the room at Cynthia. She finally understood. The barn wasn't gone forever. Her money was about to bring it back. The first crack in Cynthia's armor wasn't the $6 million estimate. It was the homeowners realizing they might have to pay it. The emergency meeting went from silence to chaos in about 8 seconds. What do you mean the HOA could be liable? Does insurance cover this? Who authorized the demolition? Why were we never told? Voices bounced off the clubhouse walls. Chairs scraped across tile. Somebody knocked over a paper cup, and burnt coffee spread beneath the front table, while Cynthia hammered her little wooden gavel like noise could somehow restore her authority. Order. Nobody listened. I stood against the back wall beside Rebecca. For once, I didn't need to say anything. Cynthia had spent months telling Briarwood residents that I was the problem. Now the projector behind her showed $5,842,600 in reconstruction costs. Numbers don't care about reputation. Rebecca leaned toward me. Watch the board members. I did. 3 of them wouldn't look at Cynthia. That mattered. The treasurer, Martin Hale, kept rubbing his forehead. Finally, he stood. Cynthia, did the board vote to authorize demolition? The room went quiet. Her fingers tightened around the gavel. The board previously authorized enforcement action. That isn't what I asked. Martin's voice shook. Did we vote to demolish Mr. Mercer's barn? No formal vote was necessary under emergency. Did we vote? Cynthia stared at him. No, there it was. One word. Another domino. Martin sat down like somebody had removed the bones from his legs. Rebecca opened her briefcase. Then she handed me a printed email. I already knew which one. Remove the structure before Mercer delays phase 4 again. I'll handle the paperwork. Cynthia's own words. Rebecca had copies for every board member. She didn't distribute them that night. Not yet. Good evidence is like a sharp tool. You don't swing it around. You use it exactly once, exactly where it matters. The lawsuit moved fast after that. Briarwood's insurance carrier hired its own attorneys. The developer hired separate counsel. The demolition contractor filed a cross-claim. Everybody wanted distance from Cynthia. Then the insurance company discovered the forged demolition authorization. That was when things got ugly. Their policy covered negligence. It did not automatically cover intentional illegal acts, meaning if Cynthia had knowingly ordered the demolition after being warned she lacked authorization, Briarwood could face coverage problems. The HOA's attorney called Rebecca the next morning. Settlement. Their first offer was $850,000. Rebecca put the letter on my kitchen table. I looked at the number. Then through the window at the empty foundation. No second offer. $1. $6 million. No third. $2. For million. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. That's real money. So was the barn. She nodded. We rejected it. Cynthia apparently thought that made me greedy. She said so during her deposition. I watched the recording later. Fluorescent lights. Gray conference room. Cynthia sitting stiffly beside her attorney. Mr. Mercer is exploiting an unfortunate misunderstanding for financial gain. Rebecca's voice came from off-camera. Mrs. Harrow, were you informed before demolition that county authorization had not been confirmed? I don't recall. Rebecca placed the email in front of her. Paper slid across wood. That tiny sound changed the room. Please read your response. Cynthia looked down. Silence. Mrs. Harrow? Her attorney shifted. You may answer. Cynthia swallowed. I understand the risk. Rebecca waited. And? Cynthia's jaw tightened. Remove the structure before Mercer delays phase 4 again. And the final sentence. Another silence. I'll handle the paperwork. Rebecca let 5 full seconds pass. You could hear the air conditioning vent. Then she asked the question that destroyed Cynthia's last defense. What paperwork were you planning to handle after the structure had already been demolished? Cynthia looked toward her lawyer. He didn't look back. 3 days later, the developer produced another document. A commission agreement. Cynthia's real estate company stood to receive substantial bonuses if Phase 4 homes closed before the end of the fiscal quarter. There it was. Motive. My barn hadn't been demolished for community safety. It hadn't been demolished for architectural harmony. It had been demolished because it stood between Cynthia and a payday. The county prosecutor requested the complete file. The Preservation Commission joined the civil action. Then the HOA board voted 6-1 to remove Cynthia as president pending investigation. She was the only vote against. I heard about it while standing inside the ruined foundation with Elaine. She was cataloging limestone blocks. I picked up one rusted square nail from the dirt. Small thing. Hand-forged. Probably older than my father. My phone buzzed. Rebecca. Cynthia removed. I stared at the message. Elaine looked up. Good news. I slipped the nail into an evidence bag. First payment. Because removing Cynthia wasn't the finish line. I didn't want revenge. I wanted every beam back. Every stone. Every hinge. Every scar in that would recreated where salvage wasn't possible. Cynthia had said my barn was gone forever. Now 6 preservation firms were preparing reconstruction bids. And the judge hadn't even seen the photographs yet. The courtroom smelled like old wood, floor wax, and rain. Outside, a November storm tapped against the tall windows of Williamson County Circuit Court. Inside, nobody moved when Judge Harrison picked up the photograph. My photograph. Cynthia standing beside the demolished barn. White shoes covered in dust. Excavator behind her. That little satisfied smile still on her face. The image filled the courtroom monitor. 12 feet wide. Rebecca stood beside it. Mr. Mercer, when was this photograph taken? 8:51 that morning. After the demolition? Yes. And what did Mrs. Harrow say immediately before you took it? Cynthia's attorney stood. Objection. Hearsay. Overruled. Judge Harrison didn't even look up. I kept my eyes on Cynthia. She said, your barn is gone forever. Silence. Not dramatic silence. Courtroom silence. The kind where you hear paper shift 3 rows behind you. Rebecca nodded. And what did you say? I told her I was taking the picture for the rebuild. A few people in the gallery looked toward Cynthia. She stared straight ahead. The smirk was gone. The trial had lasted 6 days. By then, the jury had seen everything. The survey proving my farm had never belonged to Briarwood. The preservation covenant. Frank Delaney's testimony confirming his signature had been copied onto an invalid demolition authorization. Security footage showing Cynthia's crew cutting my chain. The developer's warning email. Cynthia's response. I'll handle the paperwork. Then came the commission agreement. That one hurt her most. Rebecca projected the bonus schedule onto the screen. If Phase 4 closed before December 31st, Cynthia's brokerage would receive an additional $310,000. 310,000 reasons to get my barn out of the way. Cynthia testified on day 5. She wore navy blue. No jewelry except a small cross around her neck. Her voice had lost that syrupy confidence. She said she believed she was protecting Briarwood. Rebecca walked toward the witness stand. Protecting it from what? An unsafe structure. County Inspector Delaney testified it was safe. I received conflicting information. From whom? Cynthia hesitated. I don't remember. Rebecca picked up the email. You remembered well enough to order demolition 4 days after being warned there was no authorization. Cynthia's attorney objected. Overruled. Rebecca stepped closer. And you stood to personally profit if the access road was completed? My company had a standard brokerage agreement, worth a $310,000 performance bonus. That wasn't why. Yes or no? Cynthia's fingers tightened around the witness rail. Yes. That word landed like a dropped hammer. Then came damages. Elaine Porter testified for nearly 2 hours. She explained why you couldn't rebuild a protected 1948 timber frame barn with modern trusses and pressure-treated lumber. Original white oak dimensions had to be replicated. Traditional mortise and tenon joints. Hand-finished surfaces. Salvaged limestone. Custom-forged hardware. Preservation certified craftsman. She displayed the carved beam carrying 14 sets of initials. My grandfather's S.M. was still visible. Judge Harrison leaned forward. Elaine explained that the surviving beam would be incorporated into the reconstructed structure. Not hidden. Preserved. That mattered to me more than every dollar discussed afterward. Then the numbers appeared. Historic reconstruction for $1,380,000. Engineering and preservation supervision. $612,000. Site remediation and material recovery, $284,000. Lost business use and related damages, $326,000. Legal and professional costs allowed under the covenant, $198,000. Punitive damages attributable to intentional conduct pushed the judgment beyond the number everyone had been whispering about for months. $6 million. The judge returned after the final hearing with 27 pages in his hand. Nobody breathed normally. He described Cynthia's conduct as deliberate. He described the HOA's actions as unauthorized. Then he said the sentence I had waited 18 months to hear. The injured property owner is entitled to restoration, not merely replacement. Restoration. I closed my eyes. For half a second, I could hear Grandpa's hammer again. Wood remembers. Judge Harrison looked directly at Cynthia. Mrs. Harrow, you treated legal boundaries as inconveniences and historic property as disposable. She stared down. He lifted the judgment. The law does not. Then he handed the order to the clerk. Total liability exceeded $6 million, divided among the HOA, developer, contractor, applicable insurance coverage, and Cynthia according to the court's findings. Nobody cheered. This wasn't television. There was only the soft scrape of Cynthia's chair as she sat down. She looked smaller. Rebecca touched my shoulder. We got the rebuild. Not the money. The rebuild. That was the point. Outside the courthouse, rain had stopped. I stood on the stone steps while reporters gathered near the entrance. My phone buzzed. Elaine had sent me a photograph from the farm. The first replacement white oak timbers had arrived that morning. Massive, rough, beautiful. And lying across the top was the salvaged beam from 1948. 14 initials, including S.M. Cynthia had once stood in my dust and told me the barn was gone forever. The judge had just answered her. No, put it back. The first hammer strike came at 7:14 on a cold March morning. One clean hit. Oak against oak. The sound rolled across the pasture and disappeared toward Briarwood Hills. I stood beside the foundation with coffee warming my hands while 6 timber framers guided the first reconstructed bent into position. Fresh white oak smelled sweet in the morning air. Not like demolition dust. Not like diesel. Like something alive. It had been 22 months since Cynthia's excavator came through my gate. The reconstruction took nearly a year. Nothing about it was fast. That was the point. Preservation crews recovered almost 40% of the original usable material. Every limestone foundation block was cleaned, numbered, mapped, and returned as close as possible to its original position. The surviving hand-forged hinges went back onto the eastern doors. The old weather vane was repaired. Even the north wall boards were milled with the same rough-sawn texture Dad used to run his fingers across while drinking coffee. But the most important piece went in last. Grandpa's beam. The one marked 1948. 14 sets of initials. The crew gathered quietly when the crane lifted it. I watched S.M. rise above the foundation. For a moment, I wasn't 47 anymore. I was 8. My hands were wrapped around an oversized hammer. Grandpa was standing behind me. Wood remembers. The beam settled into its mortise. The carpenter drove the oak peg home. Fuck. That sound nearly broke me. Nearly. Across the ridge, Briarwood looked different too. Phase 4 never got its road through my property. The developer redesigned the entire access plan at its own expense. 8 houses had to be repositioned. 2 lots disappeared completely. The dotted red line that once ran straight through my barn vanished from the final county map. My fence stayed exactly where it had always been. So did the orange survey marker Cynthia once stepped over. I replaced the gate chain. This time, I added a small steel sign. Private property. No HOA authority beyond this point. Maybe that was petty. I could live with petty. Briarwood changed after Cynthia. The board rewrote its enforcement procedures. No single officer could authorize legal action anymore. Outside counsel had to verify jurisdiction before notices were sent to neighboring properties. Financial records became available to residents online. Martin Hale became interim president. His first official act was sending me a letter. Not a violation. An apology. I framed that one. Cynthia's story ended less elegantly. Her brokerage terminated its relationship with the Phase 4 developer. Her real estate license faced disciplinary review. The forged county document became part of a separate criminal investigation. The civil judgment wiped out most of the protection she thought the HOA would provide. I never celebrated any of that. I didn't need to. Every morning, I could walk outside and see the consequence standing in my pasture. The barn. Red again. Straight again. Whole again. The reconstruction ultimately cost slightly more than the original estimate once specialty timber sourcing and preservation work were completed. Insurance covered significant portions assigned to the HOA and contractor. The remaining liability followed the parties responsible according to the judgment. People sometimes ask whether $6 million was excessive for an old barn. They're asking the wrong question. It wasn't $6 million because the barn was old. It was $6 million because Cynthia destroyed something she had been repeatedly told she had no legal right to touch. The price wasn't revenge. It was consequence. A year after reconstruction finished, I held our family gathering there again. Kids ran between the stalls. My sister brought Dad's old coffee thermos. Someone put country music on a speaker. Rain started after sunset. Then I heard it. Drops hitting the metal roof. Soft at first, then harder. Within minutes, that familiar thunder filled the barn. Everyone had to raise their voices. I didn't. I just stood beneath Grandpa's beam and listened. That sound had been missing for almost 3 years. Now it was back. Later that evening, after everyone left, I switched off the lights and walked toward my truck. The rain had stopped. Water dripped from the eaves. Across the pasture, Briarwood's porch lights glowed in perfect little rows. My headlights swept across the new gate. Then across the brass plaque Elaine had restored and mounted beside the barn entrance. Mercer Heritage Barn, 1948. County protected structure. Beneath it, I had added one small line. Rebuilt 2026. I thought about Cynthia standing in that exact spot. White sneakers covered in dust. Arms folded. Smirking. Your barn is gone forever. She had believed destruction was the final word. People like Cynthia usually do. They mistake possession for authority, paperwork for truth, aggression for power, and patience for weakness. But my father had understood something she never did. Land remembers. Wood remembers. Records remember. And eventually, courts remember too. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it sounds like a camera clicking. Sometimes it looks like an old brown folder sitting quietly in a safe. Sometimes it takes 22 months. And sometimes, if you're patient enough, justice sounds exactly like a hammer driving an oak peg back into the place someone swore would stay empty forever.